Hello and welcome back to Editorial Interchange. We This is part two. We've already had a part one. If you haven't seen part one of our voter integrity series, I suggest you go and look at that one first. You will be utterly amazed at the history of Georgia's voting machine process. There was a lot of collusion. It was amongst both parties. The courts got involved, some funky court decisions. You had counties that wouldn't turn over ballots to verify that they were legitimate. There was just a whole raft of problems. And you can see all that in episode one. So we invite you to go see that first. But now, here for episode two, Garland Favorito's joining us again. Thanks for joining us, Garland. We appreciate you spending more time with us and finishing this topic up.
I'm excited to be with you, Steve. It's great. Love to be here at the Editorial Interchange.
Well, let me ask you this. Give us a little bit about your background, because a lot of people know Garland Favorito, the guy who files the lawsuits, who stands up for voting integrity and all this kind of stuff like this. But there's a life behind all that. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, there's not much of a life left nowadays. That I've been doing 24/7 on election integrity for a long time now. But I'm a career 40 plus year IT professional. I specialized in computer programming, systems analysis, data administration, and systems development lifecycle. So what we did was we consulted and created procedures to tell large scale companies how to develop mission critical applications. That's what basically was my forte was. And then the last 13 years of my career, I spent in online banking systems. And that is interesting because a big part of that is protecting the identities, accounts, and transactions of 1.5 million customers from a cyber intrusion that compromises their accounts and their money. So, and to my knowledge, we never had a break in those 13 years, or a breach of any kind. So that's kind of my background. Then on the election integrity side, for the last 20 years, I have specialized, beginning part time with on in voting system technology and election integrity procedures, but then for the last 7 or 8 years, that's been full time. Now that I've retired. So that's basically a nutshell of my background. I have testified as an expert witness in several cases around the country and in Georgia. And we've done our organization, Voter GA, nonpartisan nonprofit, has done training of poll workers, and we've done presentations around the state, and worked with different counties, commissions, and election board members who are interested in having us kind of help out and advise.
You know, when you look at your professional life, it makes perfect sense how you got into the voter integrity. You know, computer security, following processes, making sure that everything lines up and is verifiable and accountable. I mean, you are a natural. You know, it was like divine inspiration that you had that profession and then you go into voter integrity. I think it's just a perfect match.
I think in hindsight, I think that's really true, Steve. I was originally wondering for several years after we got into this. I was talking to our co-founder Ricardo. I wonder why we're doing this, and then suddenly everything exploded in 2020. And things kind of reversed. You know, before 2020, the Democrats were very concerned about election integrity because they felt they had been cheated. And after 2020, the Republicans became more concerned, and the Democrats were quiet. So it kind of depends on who wins and who loses as to who's interested in election integrity. But one thing we've done as a nonpartisan organization, we've been true to election integrity, regardless of who wins or who loses.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Over my government experience over 20 years, I was mayor of Peachtree City. Later on, I was county commissioner in Fayette County. And I also wrote on government quite a bit. Um, but I can go back and I can point to the moment that my life flipped and I started getting into government in a big way where it was almost becoming an obsession, turning into a passion. Did you have a moment in your life that was the switch that flipped you into the voter integrity movement?
Well, I'm not sure if there was a single moment, but probably the defining moment for me was in the year 2000. In the summer of 2000, I attended a conference in Cincinnati that was sponsored by an organization now known as American Free Press, and they were it was on election integrity. And I went very skeptical. And they, when I got there, I was aware at that time that there was collusion between the Democrats and Republicans. So yeah, I was aware of that, but I had no idea in regards to the elections. But it just sounded like an interesting thing. They said we're going to show you about the electronic voting systems and why they're going to be such a problem in the future. So that kind of intrigued me, as you said, because I have that background. So I went to the conference, and they showed us. They talked about the old lever machines where you could, have no ballot, and how you can preset those to cheat X number of votes. We talked about a variety of things. We talked about the news media. That time was the book called Vote Scam, and that was the hot topic back then. We discussed the news media's role in in calling the elections with something called Voter News Service. And then they told us about the beware of the electronic voting, these unverifiable electronic voting machines that are coming, and this was in the year 2000. So I had no one cared about how you voted in 2000. I think we said this in the last segment. But so I took all that in and I looked at it and said, they're right. As much as I wanted to disprove it, anyone could switch an election very easily without detection. Nobody would ever know. But I looked at it and I said, well, but nobody's ever going to buy these systems. These are terrible. Nobody in their right mind would buy them. And I left. Didn't think anything more about it. That was summer of 2000. And then suddenly in the November, we had the hanging Chad incident that we talked about in the last segment. And suddenly there is this emphasis to go to these unverifiable voting systems, which I had concluded no one in their right mind would buy. And sure enough, Kathy Cox decided she wanted to implement this statewide in Georgia, of all places, my home state. And I thought I would just simply write to her assistant, and the professor who's conducting this voting system evaluation and say, hey, look, these systems are unverifiable to the voter. You can't audit them for election officials. They can't recount a race. You just reprint the previous unverifiable results. And there's no ballot, so no transparency. And we talked about that in the last segment. So, much to my surprise, because I was still a little bit naive then, uh, Kathy Cox spent $54 million, as you said in the last segment, and bought this unverifiable voting system over our objections. Our objections included the Fulton County Elections Director, I think the chair of the Georgia GOP at that time. A lot of people knew the problems and argued against them, but she was determined to buy them because she thought that she could use that wonderful purchase that touches everybody and walk right into the governor's mansion. Well, it all backfired on her in 2002 when there were upsets. She was a Democrat, and the Republicans unexpectedly won the Senate and the gubernatorial race. Everything down ballot went to the Democrats, though. But that upset her base, and there was no way they were going to vote for her for governor after that. So she lost in the primary against the lieutenant governor at that time, Mark Taylor. And that's a little bit of background how I got into all this.
Well, you know, it still amazes me, Garland, that even today you have people who are in denial that an election can be hacked or fixed or rigged, whatever term you want to use, and that these machines are vulnerable. We got into the thing like with COVID-19 where they had trust the science. They come up with these phrases that these machines are impenetrable. Nothing can happen to these things, and a lot of people have forgotten that early on, it was congressional Democrats who were complaining about the voting machines. It wasn't the Republicans. And, everybody's thinking back to about the Trump era, with the 2020 election and whatnot. But it was congressional Democrats early on that were complaining about these machines.
There is a video of probably a dozen or more of the top congressional Democrats that you described, each explaining that there's an issue with the voting system. This is back in 2018. We have to do something. We have to do something. We have to do something. Suddenly, when President Trump was pretty obviously cheated out of the 2020 election, they turned completely quiet. And then the Republicans were started to talk about election integrity. We were excited because we thought that now we have the Republicans and the Democrats on board, we can get something done. But the Democrats then suddenly went back in their shell, and they haven't been as active as they were in 2018 because that our core supporters back then were mostly the Democrats, along with libertarians and grassroots Republicans.
And I think the political tactic they used was they were calling you an election denier. They had to attach a phrase to you. And once they start that election denier label and they start going after people, and people can lose their jobs, possibly lose elections or whatever, because you're called a denier, well, then the hackers and the other experts who know that these machines can be penetrated and rigged, they start backing away. And then it leads to this open vacuum where the public and the news media, start reporting, well, these people are election deniers. How could they possibly say, this election isn't valid and whatnot? So it seems like the political tactics of the day end up hurting us in the long run.
Well, that was a stupid, one of the stupidest phrases I've ever heard because nobody denied that there was an election. Uh, we we found 13 different um, aspects of outcome determinative fraud, errors, and irregularities over the last 4 years. We've posted it on our website. No one has ever been able to refute any of it. I've testified as an expert witness in multiple cases. Again, no one has been able to refute it. Even in Fulton County, when I testified about Fulton County errors and the manipulation there, they did not refute it. So there's certain terms that are used. That's one of them. There's a couple of other ones, baseless claims of fraud. There are the big lie. There's several different terms. They all come from a single source. And they're propagated through the media. I call them the Mockingbird media assets because in 1975, the Church Committee found that the Central Intelligence Agency had 200 media assets worldwide that they employed to basically change the news to what they want it to be. So if they are manipulating elections all throughout the world, which is pretty well established now, why wouldn't they have been trying to manipulate the 2020 election in the most powerful of all countries on the face of the earth?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the big ironies of it all is they say, well, this is a recent phenomenon. Elections have been rigged for since the beginning of the country. There's always been some. I remember the most famous one was Lyndon Baines Johnson when he ran for Congress. And he and his cohorts actually held up the little voting box that they brought the additional, he needed to know how many votes he needed. And he just happened to bring a box with that many votes in it, and they posed with the box. It had the little number on it and everything. And there's a black and white photo. You can look it up on the internet, and they rigged the election to get him into Congress. And the rest is, history. He ended up becoming speaker and president.
Yeah,
But
ballot box 13, I think was the number.
okay, yeah, I couldn't remember the number, but you can find that. The viewers can find that on the internet. But hey, just to show the viewers that this was not something that just occurred during the 2020 election. We've got a clip from 8 years ago from CBS News. Let's run that clip.
And I'm afraid the election's going to be rigged. I have to be honest, because I think my side was rigged.
Sometimes folks, if they lose, they start complaining that they got cheated. But I've never heard of somebody complaining about being cheated before the game was over.
President Obama responding Thursday to Donald Trump's claim that the election could be rigged. While dismissing Trump's concerns, the president did say the federal government is ready to help local election officials if it turns out their voting machines are vulnerable to hackers.
With recent hacks of the Democratic Party, there are worries that a cyber attack could influence voting results in November. Those fears were heightened by a report from the Brennan Center for Justice. It shows significant hacking vulnerabilities for computerized voting machines, with little being done about it. Joining us with more on that is Dan Ackerman, senior editor at CNET. Dan, good morning.
Hey.
It certainly feels like this is the year of the hack.
It does. You could almost call this the year of the hack, but it's part of a longer trend line that goes back a few years. And what we've seen especially is that government data and political data, whether it's the OPM data breach or the DNC emails, it's a valuable target. So obviously the next step is the big prize would be an election, especially when people start using words like rig and throwing that around.
U.S. elections are locally run, thousands of different systems, varying degrees of security. Is that a good thing or a bad thing that it's split up like that?
Yeah, the way we run elections here, it's very much on the local level. So every state and even cities within the state, they can have different types of electronic voting machines from different manufacturers running different software, different operating systems, updated and patched differently. If you ask any IT guy about that, they're going to say it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Some of the key battleground states, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, seems like they have updated their software. But what is the game plan? I mean, why are we not updating all of this software around the nation to ensure this doesn't happen?
Right, because we don't have a uniform sort of national code of what of what voting machines need to have, what they need to look like. It's really up to every state individually. Now, some of the best case scenarios are machines where they record the vote electronically, but they also simultaneously create a paper record.
Right.
And you can actually see that at the same time. So then you could take any individual machine or group of machines and audit the results and check the paper, check the results. But that's not every electronic voting machine. And obviously not every voting machine is an electronic one, right now.
How easy is it to hack an electronic voting machine, theoretically?
You could say that there's no system anywhere that's not hackable in some form. Go back, decades, and people used to say there was no such thing as a bank vault that a criminal could not get into with enough time and enough resources. You could say the same thing here, but the fact that you have this sort of a quilt pattern of different machines and different software, and some of them are updated, some of them are old, some of them are new, it creates a lot of vulnerabilities.
Well, that was 8 years ago, Garland. It sounds like what we've been talking about for the past 4 or 5 years and the problems that we've had with our computer systems.
Yeah, nothing has changed. Most of the systems that were available there are still available today. And it's like I was saying in the last segment, we found out now just from court testimony, court documents that expert witnesses and forensics, that the voting system we're using here in Georgia was never properly certified, and it could not be certified because it stores encryption keys in clear plain text. The voluntary voting system guidelines of 2005 required that you store those in an encryption module, and that's according to what we call FIPS 140.2 standards, which is the Federal Information Processing Standards at that time. So basically, we're going to run this election on a system that is not even legitimately certifiable unless something is done between now and the 2026 primary.
Well, it's interesting. There's a international cybersecurity expert named Harry Hursty. He was the one that could literally make the old D-ball machines do anything that he wanted to. He could have candidates win that were never on the ballot. He could say, "Tell me what you want the outcome to be." He could make it happen. He really demonstrated that those things could absolutely be hacked. And listen to what he says here. He said, every single independent study where we have had access to voting machines, 100% of the voting machines have been hacked. He goes on to say, instead of saying trust but verify, you should have a zero trust approach, never trust and always verify. Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And of course, I know Harry. He's added a lot. Harry runs the DEF CON center out in Las Vegas every year, where they do, in fact, hack the whatever voting systems they can get. They break into every one of them in a matter of minutes and change the results. So he's absolutely right about that.
Well, one of the points he made, and for viewers, you may want to ask your local elections official this, or maybe the IT department for the county or city government. But Hersey says if you've got any way to enter it, Wi-Fi connection, if you've got a hardline connection, if you've got a flash drive, USB port, any method of getting that computer, it's suspect and capable of being hacked. And here's one of the big problems that he pointed out. He said that a lot of the voting computers are made using foreign hardware. So the hardware is developed somewhere else. Well, what's in those chipsets? What's embedded in some of that hardware? That's one thing that we know. We know the Chinese have done this with the security cameras, where they were starting to broadcast on a Wi-Fi signal what was on the security cameras, although it was never even listed as that was a feature of the security cameras. Then he goes on to say some of Dominion's software was written in Serbia. So, I mean, our voting machine software is written in a foreign country.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. And we have learned more about this just recently since our court case, one of the court cases in September 30th of 2024. And we did find out that the Dominion voting system, which we have here in Georgia, is programmed in Serbia, programmed and maintained from Serbia. And what we also found out, to add a few more points here, that from forensics, and we've had forensic reports now from Colorado, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, 4 or 5 states on the Dominion system. We know that Democracy Suite system is not only just programmed from Serbia, but it is designed to be remotely accessed. Now, when I say that, I'm not just talking about one component. Every component in the system is designed for remote access. So what I mean by that is the database has to be configured for remote access. The manipulation tool, which is not even certified, it's called SQL Server Management Studio, that has to be set up for remote access. The ports that are used to get into the system are default ports, the easiest one to get into. And then the firewall rules are non-existent. So anyone in the entire world can get into a Dominion Democracy Suite 5 system. We believe the same thing exists in ES&S based on one of the forensics we've seen there, the exams. But here's another thing, Steve, just to double down on all this, what Harry's saying. We now know that all of the Dominion Democracy Suite systems worldwide are connected through an X.509 certificate. There's nothing wrong with using an X.509 certificate, but what they did was they used the same value that is transmitted to each of these machines throughout the entire world. So Georgia's common shared value is the same as Arizona's, is the same as Michigan's, is the same as Wisconsin's, and it is the same as the Serbian programmers.
Right.
So the Serbian programs, not only are they programmed and maintained, but they have accessibility remotely to the system during the elections. And we now know from discovery In the Patrick Byrne case, where Dominion made the mistake of suing Patrick Byrne, we now know that the Serbian programmers accessed the voting system in Georgia, in Gwinnett County in 2020, and in Michigan in 2020. And on top of that, we also know now that the system was remotely accessed by Dominion in the 2021 U.S. Senate runoff. So you put all that together with the fact that the Secretary of State, Ravensburger, and all his minions, Gabe Sterling, as well as the Dominion CEO, John Poulos, and all his minions, they've always told us the system is not connected to the internet. There's no remote access. That's all false. The system is designed to be accessed from the internet, and it has been, in fact, remotely accessed in the 2020 and 2021 elections. And we believe, although we haven't proved yet, that it was accessed in 2024 here in Georgia.
I recall hearing something about the votes being tabulated in Spain, where they were going across the internet. Do you know anything about that? Where apparently they were compiled in Spain and then sent back to Georgia's or something to that nature.
They are compiled by a Spanish company. So the story behind that, and this is another bizarre story that you're not going to believe, but the story behind this one is that, in this case, it was then Secretary of State Brian Kemp signed an agreement with a company called SOE Software out of Tampa, Florida, and they are owned by Seidel, which is a Spanish company. And this agreement was to publish the results of the election results for the state of Georgia. So now they've since changed the system after this came about. But it used to be if you would go in and you would look at the election results, it would look like the Secretary of State's page, but in the URL, you would see that it was coming from Clarity Elections, which is owned by SOE Software out of Tampa, Florida. So they were creating a page to make it look like the Secretary of State's page, but it wasn't. And the counties send their results to SOE Software for publication and even aggregation. And then they are sent to the Secretary of State's office. Unbelievable that the counties do not transmit their results to the Secretary of State. They transmit it to a third party, which then relays them later on to the Secretary of State.
We've come a long way from just hand counting some votes and figuring out who won at the end of the night, right?
Right. It just seems like that the election officials have done everything they can conceivably do to put every vulnerability into the system that can be exploited over the past decade or so.
It literally does almost look like if you wrote a manual on how to make the most vulnerable system possible, you would emulate what we're doing.
Right. And then you have to ask the next question is, could all that have been done by accident? Or is it, in fact, intentionally designed to do?
I mean, I think that's a legitimate question to ask. And, just for the record, Hursty, the international cybersecurity expert, he contends that hand-marked paper ballots, optically scanned, are the most secure form of voting. This is from the guy who's analyzed every voting machine and software package he can get his hands on. And he said the best way to do it is hand-marked paper ballots, optically scanned.
Well, and I basically agree with him on here, but I would like to add one little caveat. The safest thing to do is to do hand-marked paper ballots. You can optically scan them if you want to, but ultimately you need to publicly hand count the results, and then you don't have any arguments over who won, because if it's in public, everybody can see it. They can count the bases. Because even if you optically scan them, the scanners can be easily corrupted, and there is no way, once they are corrupted, there is just no amount of auditing that you can do to ensure that the tabulation of an optically scanned ballot is in fact accurate. So in that little area, I think I would add that caveat to what Harry is saying.
That's fair. You know, I will give you some examples, personal examples, when you're talking about vulnerabilities. When I was on the County Board of Commissioners in Fayette County, we have a large meeting chambers that we hold our Board of Commissioners meetings in, and the Planning Commission uses it and everyone else uses it. Holds a large number of people, several access points in that facility, you know, because you've got to have the fire exits and all this kind of stuff. And one year they held the voting machines. That the elections office upstairs was being remodeled, and they put all the voting machines down in the counts and the chambers down there where we have our meetings. And I came out there one day before one of our meetings, and I looked in the hallway where there's a fire exit right at the end of the hallway coming off of the meeting chambers. And there were these large black boxes, and they were in the way. And I thought they were blocking the fire exit. So I asked, what in the world are these boxes? Why are they blocking the fire exit here? If we've got a fire, we're going to have a problem. Oh, those are the voting machines. They had been voting for early voting, and they just took them down, put them in a box, and set them in an open hallway next to an exit with no alarm on it, no nothing. You could have taken the voting machines out of the building, and nobody would have even known it. And in Cobb County, I do remember somebody actually stole a voting machine. And what are you going to do with all those votes that were on that machine? But now another thing, I'm looking at our local elections, and one of our local municipalities, they hold the elections in their library. That's quite a common thing. They also use churches, you know, because they have the big fellowship halls and whatnot. So they make ample space for a voting process. Well, you naturally want to ask the question, who has keys to this building? Because when you're talking about early voting, if they're using one of those facilities for early voting, those things are in there for several weeks. Who has keys to the building? Well, the custodians do. The person who manages it do. Maybe some of the employees who open up the building do. Maybe the police, if it's the library, the police and fire might have a master key. So terribly unsafe. And they're going to tell you, but wait a minute, Steve. We've got a little security tab on the box. It's a little metal looking tab that just kind of goes in there and secures. Well, what if I can get my hands on another security tab, or I have one forged or something like this? There's just no security on those boxes. Somebody could go in there in the middle of the night and simply put a flash drive in there and totally reprogram and reorder the votes and everything. And you've got so many keys out there to some of these facilities, no one would ever know who opened the door unless you had video surveillance or something like that. It's just amazing. And these are things that are happening in cities and counties all over the state and maybe all over the nation.
Well, Dr. Haldeman, to your point, actually hacked the voting system in front of the United States District Court, not once, but twice. And the second time he did it with the pen of the opposing attorney, Secretary Ravensburger's attorney. Got in and switched.
And here's the thing, they'll tell you in the elections offices, they'll say, well, we've run all the diagnostics and we verified that they're good. Great. On that day, they were verified and the diagnostics post. What if somebody enters the building later and gets access to those machines? Do you do that every day? Or, you know, what's the process? And generally it's done right at the front end, and that's it.
So that's a great point, and we didn't talk about that in the previous segments. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because what the elections officials will tell you is that logic and accuracy testing will take care of all this. You don't have anything to worry about. But the system can be programmed, even if it's not physically accessed, it can be programmed to count differently on different days or after a certain number of ballots have been cast. And, you know, in testing, you only cast a couple of ballots just to test it out. And so the system, logic and accuracy testing, cannot prove that the system will count right on election day. In fact, Haldeman said in his security analysis that there is no form of pre-election or parallel testing that would prevent malware-based fraud. And he's absolutely right. And he's saying the same thing we've been saying for about 15 years.
Right. Well, I'll give you another good example. In my hometown of Peachtree City, Georgia, generally, if you do early voting, you have a series of the machines where you cast the vote. It has the touch screens. It prints out the paper. Then you take it to a scanner, generally with a city our size. Now, it may be bigger in larger counties and larger cities, but in a city our size, which is about 39,000 people, you would have one scanner in each of the 3 early voting stations. Well, those scanners have cards in them that hold the data. They only hold so much data. It's finite. Once it reaches the maximum amount of data, the machine stops working. We actually had this happen in Peachtree City. It was during one of the, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was the 2020 election.
Yes, it
It was
was.
such a heated debate. All these people were flooding in to do early voting because they didn't want to miss out on election day. So they're flooding into the building. They reached a maximum number of votes. And what happens? Well, they can't let it just shut down and tell people they can't vote. So what do? They open up the scanner. They bring in a technician from Dominion, or I think he was subcontracted with Dominion. He comes in, he opens the machine, he puts his laptop and plugs it into the actual scanner, runs diagnostics and all this other stuff. Then he ends up pulling and realizes it's the card, pulls out the memory card and hands it to someone in the elections capacity, an elections official, just hands them the card and shoves a new one in. Now, there are so many problems with that scenario. First of all, you have breached security. You've broken the seal on the machine. Second of all, he plugs a laptop in it. Well, he could easily reprogram the card, the SD card, while he's got the laptop plugged into it. Then he pulls out the card and hands it to somebody who he doesn't even know and entrusts them with holding on to the card. Huge mistake. But then you put a new card in there. Could the new card already be manipulated in some way? I mean, you've got, just with that one scenario that actually happened, you probably have 5 different ways to breach the system and totally ruin the number of votes. That is enough capacity, too, in votes to turn a local city or county election.
Absolutely. And I remember that event. I remember actually going to the Fayette County office and talking with the former elections director about that.
Yes. I mean, it's amazing. But Hursty brought up a great point. He was talking about local and county governments are the most vulnerable because you're voting for it all on one system. So if you can hack that system, then you've pretty much got it. With a presidential election, you've got, all these different forms of voting, and you're spreading out the risk at least a little bit with that. But one of the things that he was talking about was it's not just an accidental breach or losing some data. It's not necessarily an evil agent trying to come in and infiltrate your machines. But now what he's worried about, and I am too, and I'm sure you are, what he's worried about now is you have people intentionally in the governments that are conducting the elections that are intentionally trying to sway the elections using the equipment or procedures that they're changing or different types of methodologies. And I think that is something now that, beyond the machine, regardless of what type of thing you're using, you've got people who are intentionally trying to ruin the vote or change the vote in some way.
Yeah, and that's always been a concern because, how do you protect against the inside job? The way to protect against that is to make virtually everything transparent and public. So every back office process is open for public inspection or credential poll watchers who verify each and every process. We've made a lot of good progress in the laws in Georgia to allow that to happen, as well as some state election board rules. So we are, in fact, one of them bizarrely was under challenge. I have no idea why you would not want public observation of all processes, but I suspect that one will be upheld by the. I think it's in the Supreme Court right now. So, but yeah, so that's the thing. Another interesting point that you bring up, because people have been psychologically programmed and conditioned to accept the way elections are conducted. The way they are conducted is with secretly counted results, secret proprietary software, secretly preserved ballots, and secret files, secret back office activities. And all, all that's got to be public and transparent and open. Once you do that, then that would resolve or at least lower the risk of an inside job.
Yeah, all that with machines that are using foreign components. It's
Yeah,
just it's incredible.
and
But you know,
well,
go ahead.
since you mentioned that, everything you say is going to trigger me to say something. So the election systems have been designated as critical infrastructure. But the systems do not comply with critical infrastructure guidelines. And this is that the Department of Defense uses, that the Department of Energy uses. They don't comply. So that presents, to your point, a security problem. We have really an election security crisis, because it is an invitation for foreign interference if you are running your elections on a system that doesn't comply with basic critical infrastructure standards, after you've said that elections are critical infrastructure according to Homeland Security. So I'm hoping that the president's going to address this with his, maybe a future executive order. I know they're assessing the security of the voting system right now. The director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has already told President Trump in the cabinet meeting. We can watch the video that they have evidence of the system has been is not only vulnerable but has actually been manipulated to some extent. I think that she has a lot more evidence than what she's saying. So so another key point is this whole foreign interference with the chips that you're talking about, and they need to comply with the same standards that a Department of Defense system would have to comply to, or a Department of Energy.
Well, just in 2020, I mean, we're just talking 5 years ago. We had several states. I'm going to read these off. We had several states that prohibited poll watchers from watching the polls, even though state law permitted it. Pennsylvania was embroiled in one voting controversy after another as state officials attempted to subvert the state's statutory voting regulations. And Pennsylvania is notorious for voting irregularities. The Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, exceeded her authority by imposing new restrictions on poll challengers. And then she had been overturned in the court 3 times for creating rules without following the proper process. Then you had a whole host of states that had to be forced in the courts to delete the names of deceased persons and people no longer living in their states. I mean, these are all things that they were intentionally doing to keep the voting process. And that doesn't even include the voter intimidation. We saw in Arizona on several occasions, especially Maricopa County seems to be like the Fulton County of Arizona. But
It is.
they were coming out and saying, you know what, the machines aren't working. You're going to have to come back tomorrow. The line is too long. You're all going to have to come back. And they're like, no, if we're in line by this time, we're supposed to be able to vote. They tried every trick in the book to get these people. There was also all kinds of intimidation measures from various groups as well. But they had some people that had a badge that somehow intimated that they were a poll worker, and they weren't a poll worker. And they were giving bad advice on coming back another day and all these types of things. There's just all kinds of stuff like that. And a lot of that is sponsored by either NGOs or the local government itself.
Yeah, and you mentioned Pennsylvania. They have still never reconciled the number of voters who voted with the number of ballots cast, and they're still off by 100,000 from the 2020 election. So that's a big mess. And of course, in Georgia, we've got we know we've made some improvements, but we're still uh, not probably not as bad as some of the other states. But why is it that you have to sue to be able to watch the elections? It's crazy stuff.
And of course, we had the woman who wanted to be governor, Stacey Abrams. Um, she was involved in a lot of voting irregularities. She had her organization called Fair Fight Action. And what were some of the things that she was involved in? I know she had a lot of voter registration uh, things going on in various places, and a lot of those ballots were rejected. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I think she had a hand in that agreement to that signature matching agreement. I think that we talked back in the last segment. But actually, the most interesting thing of all this is how she funded this her activities, which was is just kind of bizarre that she got all this money for these, get out the vote efforts. And we've learned recently that Doge has found that this account that was set up for her with $2 billion in it.
Right,
So
right, right, right.
I was pretty stunned to find that out.
Well, I think every lawsuit she filed, along with the Democrat National Convention and I think the Harris campaign, every one of those I think were thrown out. I don't think she had a successful lawsuit. They tried a lot of what I would term lawfare tactics, but none of them succeeded.
Yeah, one of the most bizarre ones was the True the Vote case, where they had challenged the voters. Well, and I'm sorry, let me back up. They challenged invalid registrations because the voters had left. There was no voter to challenge, and because they'd moved out of state and this other kind of thing, and uh, they had filed a case, and there wasn't even a legitimate plaintiff for the case. So that came out in court. But they were trying to claim voter suppression, and uh, but the people who made the challenge, they didn't even know any of the voters. They just looked at the registration file and they could see that the registration was invalid because the voter had left. So that was the big court case Verified Action was involved in, and they lost that. Crazy stuff.
Right. And let's talk about how effective is the new state elections board? I know there's been a lot of legislation over several general assemblies related to that. Do they have any authority? Can they create more accountability? Or does the Secretary of State's office still have that kind of responsibility? How does that work?
It's a highly political situation right now. So the state election board has the authority to issue rules which are subordinate to Georgia law. And so a law might say what to do, and the rule could say how to do it. Um, so, and in the past, it's been somewhat political. It has gotten better lately because for the first time this year and a little bit of last year, we've actually gotten uh, several individuals on the board, a majority, who actually care about election integrity. We've never had that before. I was pleased to get two rules passed last year. We found out that there was a QR code ballot rejection problem where the system did not actually count ballots. And it would reject the ballot, not count it all together, but you wouldn't know it. And the way to find that out is if you have to match the tabulation tape, the number of ballots cast on that with the number of ballots on the scanner. The counties were not doing that. They would not have been able to detect the error. They found this error in Tennessee and ended up removing the Dominion Democracy Suite 5.5 system out of the county based on the recommendation of the Secretary of State. And that's the same system we use here in Georgia. So I was able to get two rules passed thanks to the board and the new members to compare those two counts to make sure that the system was not losing ballots as it did in Tennessee. So those are a couple of rules we got passed. Pretty happy about that. But there is, we've just gotten past legislative initiative to give them more funding, make them more independent from the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State's investigations are highly politicized, and in particular when it's dealing with a machine or any type of serious uh, corruption, they go into cover-up mode.
Led in Fulton County.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if it's a onesie twosie, what I call it, if somebody voted out of the appropriate district board, they're all about that. But when you talk about real corruption, they go into cover-up mode.
Do you think that's because they don't want to be embarrassed by the failure of the system, that because their names are on it?
Yeah, that plus the fact they literally could be charged with felonies and do jail time because of the laws. So I think that that is what's driving them right now.
Now, but between the state election board and the Secretary of State, does the Secretary of State have any veto power over anything that the State Board of Elections does, or vice versa? What's the power structure?
Not really. Well, the state election board used to have complete power, even to supervise the Secretary of State's office. That was changed in 2006, and the legislature took that power away to a degree. So the Secretary of State right now is doing investigations in elections investigations, but they're doing it for the state election board. The state election board has the sole authority to initiate election investigations in the state of Georgia. Now that includes Fani Willis. Fani Willis has no jurisdiction to initiate an election investigation in Georgia. If it's passed to her, she can do it, but she cannot initiate one. She did that, and the courts have allowed her to get away with it because the judicial system is about as corrupt as you can get. So, that's pretty much the background of that. So the bottom line is they are kind of they're sort of there's more and more independence. We have tried to get more independence, but right now they do have more funding to get their own investigators and hopefully their own attorney.
Right. Well, I know with Fani Willis, she actually even campaigned on going after Trump. So, I mean, not only could she not be handed the case, but she actually campaigned on it. And do you think that suit's still open, isn't it? I mean, has that thing not gone away yet?
It has not totally gone away yet. It is still open.
Under the circumstances, would they need another jurisdiction to pick up the case? Is that the situation they're in now?
Yeah, I believe that is the case that they're in. And I would argue that even any other jurisdiction never had judicial authority to begin with either. Now, the courts, I'm not sure the courts have not found that to be the case, but that is exactly what the clear plain text of Georgia law says.
Yeah. Well, you have three things that voter GA looks at that you're looking at. Let's talk about some solutions. Secure paper ballots, one of them. Make all ballots public records, because they're not public records now, or they just don't let you see them.
We have actually gotten that law passed to make the ballots public record, but the counties want up to $50,000 to show you the ballots. So they have circumvented the law in that way.
Okay. And then adopt transparent election processes. So what would be included under all that?
Well, I think basically the way they were, what we discussed earlier, all the absentee ballot processing, that should be open for the public to verify. We don't do signature matching, anymore, but do driver's license matching. That should be open for the public to verify. Of course, they except for private information, which can't be shared. But those are the kind of things that we need: handwritten paper ballots, hand counting the precincts, full transparency, and there would be no dispute ever over who won an election if we did that.
Are drop boxes still allowed or no?
No, outdoor drop boxes have been banned. You can have a drop box in a polling location or an election office that is available during business hours.
Okay. And it is legal for a relative to bring other relatives' ballots into the elections office. That's legal, but you can't bring someone who's not an immediate family member's ballot. Is that right?
That is true, with the exception of if you are a caregiver, you can bring other ballots for, if you're at a nursing home or so on, and that has been subject to abuse. We're trying to tighten that down by requiring whoever is delivering those ballots to provide an ID.
Yeah, it's always fascinating the people who don't have much in the way of cognitive abilities, but yet they vote in the presidential election. It's kind of interesting how that turns out. You see a lot more voter participation from nursing homes and care facilities all of a sudden.
We saw a lot of that in Wisconsin. I think there was an active a sheriff's investigation that I believe led to some prosecutions up there.
Garland, is there anything we've left out? Is there anything that we need to talk about that we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, so I think our best hope, Steve, and this would take a whole nother segment, is Donald Trump's executive order. The executive order that he has come out with is intended to preserve and protect election integrity. It's just the first of several orders. We expect one to hopefully to address the voter roll problem of ineligible registrations on the file that we just kind of alluded to in the last two segments, and then also the whole issue of the foreign interference in the security of the voting systems and the chips. I think that there will be something to address that in the very near future. In the next couple of months, we've done a lot of work on that up at voterga.org. There's a press conference and slide deck about President Trump's executive order 14248. So I think that is going to be probably the focus, because that's our best hope to preserve and protect the 2026 election.
Now, at the local level, is there anything stopping a city or a county from going to paper ballots and abandoning the voting machines?
Technically, first of all, the municipalities are free to conduct elections the way they want. And now there's a law that any election under 5,000 registered voters you can connect, or you can do however you choose. There are statutes that we believe allow any election, any county to conduct elections with handwritten paper ballots. OCJ 21-2, 334, 366, and 437, 430 series. A lot of those statutes allow for handwritten paper ballots and hand counting of the votes. The counties get intimidated by the Secretary of State, and they don't want to stick their neck out and do what their constituents actually want them to do.
Now, if people want to get more resources on this voting issue and find out what the law says and maybe what they can do in their local jurisdiction, is voterga.org the best way to find that out?
We have a wealth of information up there that we have. In fact, you got the history that we did in the previous section was up there. All kinds of press releases, all the press conferences we've had. We typically have one every couple of months on some subject. Studies are up there. And just a wealth of information. All the legal work that we've done is up there. And we are, Steve, a nonpartisan nonprofit. We are an all-volunteer organization. So I just wanted to remind everybody that any donations are tax deductible as well. And that's how we survive and do everything we do.
And you're not And voterga.org is not affiliated with a particular political party. Is that correct?
It's a true nonpartisan nonprofit. Yeah, we neither Ricardo and I have are not affiliated with either the Democrat or the Republican parties.
Awesome. Well, my friend, thank you for giving us so much time. You did a 2-episode series with us. Valuable, entertaining subject matter. We really appreciate it. And, keep up the great work. And I would highly recommend that people go to voterga.org. If you believe in what Garland and his people are doing, please support them. Write a check. Take one meal to McDonald's that your family would normally do and send it to them. It's worth one meal to McDonald's at least to get a voting system that we can reliably count on. And they do yeoman's work. They work with the legislature. They work with the individual elected officials. They give the public all these briefings, and they go through the courts to try to force the issue when it's necessary. Garland, we appreciate you, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's been great to be here.
Thank you. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. Please like, share, and subscribe. That's what makes it all work. We'd love it if you could share our content. It helps us get more viewers, and more viewers helps us get more exposure. That's how the system works. Thank you for doing this. And you don't get long form interviews like this just anywhere. And I hope you appreciate them. And let us know who we need to interview next. Is there a topic? Is there a personality? Anyone that we can talk to? Let us know. We'd really appreciate it. You can find more information on us at editorialinterchange.net.